In the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful, and may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon His last and beloved Messenger Muhammad, and may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon you all. The title of this presentation is How to Learn Biomechanics from the Quran, from the last revelation of Allah God to people. And in other words, how to understand the human body from engineering point of view from the guidance of the Quran. So I will show in this presentation how Allah God Almighty teaches us the perfect way to understand our body from an engineering point of view by pondering upon the verses of the last revelation to people in the Quran. And you will see that this method surpasses any kind of method put forward by people. And this topic of biomechanics is the study of how the human body handles forces during physiological functioning. So, the key to understand our body from a engineering point of view and to understand biomechanics can be found in chapter 23 of the Quran, verses 12 to 14, which reads, And Allah God has created humans from an extract of clay. Then Allah God made the nutfa into a secure place of lodging. Then Allah God created the nutfa into alaqa, and Allah God created the alaqa into mudgha. Then Allah God created the mudgha into bones. Then Allah covered the bones with flesh. Then Allah brings it forth by another method of creation. So blessed be Allah, the best of creators. So, here Allah God Almighty is teaching us a way to understand the human body in a perfect way. So we can understand this by pondering upon the verses. So Allah God Almighty teaches us from these Quranic verses the optimal methodology to study and understand the human body. So let's start. The first thing Allah states that Allah God has created humans from an extract of clay. So we learn from the Quran that the first step to understand the human body is to study the elements comprising the soil and to compare them with those found in the human body, because Allah is telling us that He created us from mud. So if we do this and we look at the elements comprising the soil, we see that it's composed, for example, of hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, carbon, calcium, and these elements, iron. Now if you compare them with the elements comprising the human body, we see, glory be to Allah God, a perfect match between the two. The names of the elements are the same, also the concentrations and the function. For example, iron in the human body is involved in gas transfer and transport, and we see that in the soil also iron is involved in gaseous exchange. So this is the first step to understand our body, is to understand the elements. Now we can understand the second step again from the Quran, where Allah states, Then Allah God made the nutfa into a secure place of lodging. So the next step to understand the human body is to study the nutfa stage. And this nutfa stage is the words of Allah God to create the components of the human body, meaning studying the DNA molecule. So here Allah Almighty is telling us the second stage is to understand the words of Allah Almighty to create the proteins in the body, so understand the DNA. And the DNA is basically the instructions, the words of Allah God on how the amino acids should be assembled to create the basic building blocks of our body. This is the next step. Now the third step to understand our body, we learn again from the Quran, where Allah states that Allah created the nutfa into alaqa. The study of alaqa stage, which is the stage of stem cells, which can divide to become any cell the human body needs. Divide and differentiate. So the next step from the Quran is to understand the alaqa, and the alaqa meaning the object that clings. So here the human embryo clings to the inner wall of the womb, and here is composed of stem cells, meaning basic cells which can divide and differentiate to become any cell the body needs. So this is the next step in understanding the human body. The fourth step, Allah states, then Allah God created the alaqa into mudgha. So then Allah God urges us to study the distribution of biomass of the embryo. Mudgha meaning an object that has been chewed. And if you look at the human embryo at this stage, we see that it's like something being chewed. And what this does is, I call it distribution of biomass, meaning that the stem cells, Allah Almighty decides how many are in the head region, how many in the arms and the legs. So it's distribution of biomass. And this distribution is very important because it dictates the shape of the creature, the shape to become. And I explained this in previous lectures. The next step in understanding our body from a genetic point of view, Allah states, then Allah God created the mudgha into bones. So then Allah God Almighty created bones, which is the framework that bears the weight of the body tissue. So Allah is urging us now to study bones in the body, which is the framework that handles forces and its load-bearing structure. So if we want to understand our body, we need to understand in this stage our bones. And explained all of this in previous lectures, so you can refer to my YouTube channel and my website to see details of each and every stage. But here I'm emphasizing the methodology that Allah God Almighty teaches us in the Quran, the methodology. So then Allah states, then Allah covered the bones with flesh. So then this step, Allah God covers the bones with flesh meaning muscles, skin, etc., which is needed to perform body functions. So the next step after understanding bones, Allah is telling us to understand, to study the muscles and the skin and the ligaments and the tendons in order to understand our body in a systematic engineering way. The next step, Allah states in the verse, that Allah God brings it forth by another method of creation. So blessed be Allah God, the best of creators. So the last step in understanding the human body is to study the functional adaptation of the body which results due to external stimulus. Now, all of these previous stages you are developing within the embryo by a certain method of creation. Now, after birth, Allah God Almighty brings you forth and you mature by another method, which is what I call functional adaptation, meaning you adapt to external stimulus. For example, when you are a small boy and when you're playing around, you subject your bones and muscles to external forces. These external forces act like a stimulus for the maturation of bones and muscles. So this is what is meant in the Quran. Allah brings you forth by another method of creation. So because these external kind of factors, they are not found when you are in your mother's womb. So we see, brothers and sisters, by pondering upon these verses from the Quran, Allah is teaching us a scientific way, engineering way, to understand our body and the best way to study biomechanics and to understand the human body and how it handles forces. And this method and this methodology is far better to any kind of teaching in any university that is present now. Because this method, Allah God Almighty, who created our body, teaches us. So the Creator, He is the best to tell you how to study the product. So, to know details about each and every step, please visit my website at www.quran-miracle.com, and you can email me at zaidquran@gmail.com, and may the peace and blessings of Allah God Almighty be upon you all.